Hello and welcome. I am Dr. Dana Haggard, Professor of Management and curator of this video on the basics of motivation and performance. Let's get started. Let's start things out a little differently in this lecture. But before providing you with definitions for the topic, I want you to take a few seconds and think about what the word motivation means to you. How would you define it? I'll give you a few seconds and then we'll move on. Your definition of motivation is likely to be influenced by your own personal preferences and experiences. We are all unique human beings, and while there can be considerable overlap in what motivates us, there can also be significant differences. Those differences can be rooted in our personality, our personal or cultural values, and in our other skills and attitudes. Thus, our definitions are likely to share some basic characteristics, but have some differences that provide a bit of nuance. There are many different theories of motivation, and we will cover some in later lectures. But before we do, we need to set up a basic framework. While a definition of motivation might seem simple to describe, as we proceed, you'll see motivation is quite complex. So, this lecture will be focused on the basics of motivation and how it connects to performance, and we will cover several specific theories of motivation as they relate to an overall model of motivation in subsequent videos. As usual, I have my 3 bullet points for definitions, but the first 2 bullet points listed here actually contain 2 definitions. The first definition in each of the top 2 bullet points is from the perspective of the focal person, and the second definition is from the perspective of an outsider. The focal person definition for dictionary.com describes motivation as having a strong reason to act or accomplish something. And the APA's focal person definition is a person's willingness to exert physical or mental effort in pursuit of a goal or outcome. Both of these definitions reflect an internal perspective, that something within the person is pushing or pulling them to action. The APA definition also specifically includes the idea of willingness on the part of the person as required for motivation. The outsider or external perspective is reflected in the second definitions in the first 2 bullet points, providing with a reason to act in a certain way, and the act or process of encouraging others to exert themselves in pursuit of a group or organizational goals. In these definitions, the impetus of the motivation comes from an external source or sources. BusinessDictionary.com does a nice job of incorporating both perspectives as they define motivation as internal and external factors that stimulate desire and energy in people to be continually interested and committed to a job, role, or subject, or to make an effort to attain a goal. When someone is motivated by internal forces, we call this being intrinsically motivated. Sources of intrinsic motivation include things like the desire for a sense of accomplishment and the enjoyment of the tasks themselves. When someone is motivated by external forces, we call this being extrinsically motivated. Sources of extrinsic motivation are things like wanting to meet the expectations of others, or because we know others are depending on us. You might also have heard that generally we are intrinsically motivated to do the things we want to do, and extrinsically motivated to do the things we have to do, or the things that others want us to do. In addition to this important detail, another idea of note is that the factors stimulate desire, energy, and commitment. True motivation not only includes the desire to do something, but the willingness to extend purposeful and focused effort for a prolonged period of time. Although the importance of motivation might seem obvious, we will focus on 3 specific ways motivation is important in the workplace. The first reason listed here is because motivation is necessary for the accomplishment of tasks and the achievement of goals. In other words, things do not get done unless someone is motivated to do them. As we have mentioned before, managers get things done through other people, and implied in that statement is that managers must be able to motivate people. The second reason listed here is that performance issues are often misinterpreted as a lack of motivation rather than as a lack of ability. It seems to be a human trait to assume that if something isn't done or isn't done correctly, that the reason is that the person isn't motivated to do it or has a bad attitude. While this can be the case, It should never just be assumed. In order to improve performance, or help someone else improve their performance, a person has to recognize the root cause of the poor performance so that the proper changes are made. Performance issues that are a result of a lack of motivation call for counseling, whereas performance issues that are a result of ability call for coaching. Counseling addresses issues of attitude or willingness to engage in a behavior, whereas coaching addresses issues of ability. It does little good to offer counseling to someone whose performance issue is due to a lack of ability. If they are willing but unable to do the job, then talking to them about their bad attitude will only make things worse by increasing their frustration and possibly impacting their self-esteem and self-efficacy. It is also unproductive to offer coaching to someone who is capable of accomplishing the task but lacks the willingness. Trying to teach a person how to do a job when they are already capable of it, when their attitude is the problem, will not help them increase their performance. The last point I have listed is that motivation is important because people are motivated by different things, so there is no one-size-fits-all solution to performance issues. In order to be able to influence the behaviors of others, you have to understand the individual and what motivates them. We will get into more detail about that last point in lectures on the specific motivation theories. You may have heard the phrase that performance equals ability times effort, and that is certainly a valid way to describe the performance equation, but it is not as detailed or as useful as it could be. The performance motivation equation you see here is only slightly different in that we are substituting motivation for effort because effort is integrated into our definition of motivation. So, our basic performance equation is performance is a function of ability times motivation. Our basic equation for ability is that ability is a function of aptitude times training times resources. And motivation is a function of desires times commitment. Using the magic of algebra, our full detailed equation becomes performance is a function of aptitude, training, resources, desire, and commitment. When using a multiplicative, what do we know about the individual variables? They must all be non-zero, because if you substitute 0 in for any of the variables, performance will equal 0. So how can we use this equation to improve our management skills? It helps us by giving us a checklist to work through to determine the cause of the performance issue and consequently offers direction in how to address the problem. Here's where I would normally talk about how motivation can be measured. And motivation can be measured in many ways, but often the measurements are context or goal specific. In other words, they ask about motivation towards a particular achievement. This is consistent with the definitions of motivation, which include the idea that motivation is directed effort. Here are some examples of some scales that you can go out and take a look at. However, as I said, a lot of times these measurements are specific to a particular context. Before we can improve our performance or the performance of others, we need to first determine whether the issue is one of ability or motivation. As I said in a previous slide, the full performance motivation equation provides us a checklist of things we can address to improve our performance or help others improve their performance. We will begin by examining issues of ability and save the issues of motivation for our later videos. Ability is a function of aptitude, training, and resources. And aptitude is a person's capacity to learn skill and to perform it well. Training is providing the education and experience necessary to acquire a skill or complete a task. And resources can take many forms, such as budgets, tools, equipment, and personnel and time. The proper aptitude, training, and resources are all necessary in order to perform well. Ability issues are often caused by one of three things: an inaccurate assessment of the person's ability at the time of hire, a change in the skills required by the job over time, or a person being promoted to a position beyond their skill set. An improper assessment at the time of hire is another way of saying an error was made in the selection process and the person was not qualified for the job. If this is the case, then a decision will have to be made regarding what should be done. The options are 1, provide the person with the training to do the job, 2, find another position within the company that the person is qualified for and transfer them, or 3, terminate their employment. Keep in mind that if the error was on the part of the company in the hiring process, then the issue must be addressed so that it does not happen again. Knowingly continuing with a flawed selection system is not fair to new hires, nor anyone they will be working with. Many companies use aptitude tests in the selection process, and they can be very helpful as long as they are appropriate for the job. In other words, that they measure a person's ability to do the job or their ability to learn to do the job. Aptitude is measured on a continuum, with individuals having differing levels of aptitude for different activities. Those with lower aptitudes can be trained, but they will have to work much harder than someone with a higher aptitude. That might also require more resources. Zero aptitude is an unlikely situation, but low aptitude makes it unlikely the person will be successful regardless of the amount of training and resources they are provided. When an issue is an issue of resources, it means the person has the ability to learn, has been trained, but they don't have the resources that are necessary to be able to perform. Again, things such as equipment, budget, personnel. While a company can provide training and can provide resources, the company can't exactly provide aptitude. This is something that resides with the person. If the person had the ability to do the job when they were initially hired, but the job has changed and a different skill set is now required, your options on what to do are similar. You can provide training and keep the person in the job, or you can either transfer them or terminate their employment. If a person's ability to do a job is deteriorating, they might focus on their past performance and fail to see the need to change. They might also exaggerate certain aspects of their role while delegating or avoiding others. And finally, if the issue is the person was promoted beyond their level of skill, the question becomes, should they be trained, demoted, or terminated? People with high levels of technical skills are often promoted into management positions based on their excellent performance in their technical positions. This is not a good idea because the decision to be made a manager is not being made on the person's ability to manage, but their ability to do the current position, not the future position. According to Whetten and Cameron, there are a specific set of steps that should be taken when the performance issue is one of ability. This is the list, and the actions are listed in the order in which you should try them. When discussing the employee's performance, after you have told them their performance needs improved, step 1 is to ask them if they have all the resources that they need to do the job. The reason you start here is to minimize defensiveness. Asking if the employee needs something to do their job better puts the focus on what the manager or the company can do to help them perform better. Maybe they don't have the proper equipment or tools or software, or maybe they don't have the right personnel. If you determine that they need additional resources, provide them. If a lack of resources was the cause of the poor performance, you should see improvement in their performance after they have received their resources. If resupplying does not work, the next step is to ask them if they need additional education or job-related training. Again, the focus is on what can be done for them to help them improve and shows that management is taking responsibility by offering more training, whether that training is formal or informal. If resupplying and retraining do not fix the performance issue, then the issue is most likely one of aptitude. Employers can control training and resources, but they cannot control a person's aptitude. So if the issue is one of aptitude, then the conversation gets a little more difficult, and those supportive communication skills will really need to be displayed in order to reduce defensiveness and disconfirmation. Refitting the job means that the components of the job are changed to where the job better fits the individual rather than the individual fitting the job. They stay in the same place in the organizational hierarchy, but the job description changes. If after trying to refit, the person still cannot meet performance expectations, then the next step is to reassign them or transfer them to a different job within the company that better fits their abilities. And if reassignment does not work, then the last option is to terminate the person's employment. These are the steps that should be taken, in the order they should be taken. However, there are a few caveats. First, you must decide, is the employee in question worth the effort? In other words, is the employee someone who has a good attitude and willingness to improve? If the person is well-liked and fits well with the organizational culture, then that person has value, and every effort should be made to help them improve their performance or find a place for them in the organization before terminating them. Doesn't mean you can't terminate them, just means you should wait and try other options first. However, if the employee has a bad attitude and a low willingness to change, then you might make the decision to terminate much earlier in the process. In any case, poor performance must be addressed. If not, it will cause morale problems with other employees who see that nothing is being done. This can result in further deterioration of the work group's performance as individuals and as a group. And now, some questions for self-reflection. How did your personal definition of motivation align with the definitions presented here? Were you able to pinpoint how your personal experiences, values, attitudes, and skills might have affected your definition? Have you ever encountered a poor performer? What were your initial thoughts on why they were performing poorly? Have you ever tried to coach someone who needed counseling or vice versa? Has anyone ever tried to coach or counsel you? Were they effective? If so, why? And if not, why not? What do you think would be more difficult, coaching or counseling? This concludes the first lecture in the series on motivation. If you have any questions about the topics covered in this video, please post them to the Student Questions discussion board in Blackboard. Chances are, if you have a question, someone else has that question too. If you are intellectually curious and would like to learn more, please stay tuned for the sources and additional resources at the end of this video. Thanks for listening.